Okay, so now moving on to President, I'm going to allow 2 minutes for speeches because obviously this is a fairly important SAB position, but we'll stick to 1 minute answers for questions. So could Charlotte come and do your speech?
Well, it's fair to say our university isn't working. Before I even arrived here at uni, I was let down as a disabled student when the uni failed to offer me accommodation that suited my needs, and it was only after much negotiation and waiting that I managed to get an accessible room in the brilliant new Cryfield townhouses. The wellbeing services here are also shocking. I had 3 near misses of suicide last term, and it took weeks to get an appointment. I was terrified of competing in sports due to being an intersex athlete, and I didn't know who to talk to about this, leaving me with weeks of uncertainty whether I could compete in women's bucks or not. I was a victim of misogynistic abuse by a member of my flat, who even attempted to assault me. The university did nothing, and to this day I have to live and cook alongside this individual. Many more students also suffer here, but so few have the confidence to speak out and to stand for SU roles like I'm doing now. I want to empower all those students. The uni and the SU have the resources to be so much more, to change and to truly work for all students. Give me the chance to lead this change. It's time to unleash our uni and our SU's potential. Also, spoons on campus. Thank you.
Okay, then Luke to do his speech.
Hello everyone, I'm Luke, I'm your current Societies Officer, and I'm standing to be your next SU President. I'm proud of everything I've achieved over the last 6 months, such as implementing a new scheme to recognise our best societies, increasing society funding and make it more accessible for all societies to apply for, blocking the introduction of evening and weekend car parking charges, and preparing to bring in liberation associations at the next Student Council. Making change is an essential part of all SAB roles, and I'd love the opportunity to continue making this change throughout all areas of the SU and the wider university. If elected, I would like to lobby the university to publish an exam timetable in Term 1 so that we don't end up with a repeat of last year and you can actually know when you're going to be sitting your exams. I'd also like to roll out mental health first aid training to all society and sports club exec members. It's a great course and could really help our communities help those who are in need the most. Also, currently those in on-campus accommodations use way more energy and water than the UK national average. So I'd like to embed sustainability within the curriculum to encourage more sustainable behaviours and so that all students are doing their bit to tackle our climate emergency. I'm sure you'll also be aware of the university's recent reformed disciplinary process for sexual misconduct. I'd like to continue putting pressure on the university to reform this process to roll out to all forms of discrimination, including implementing definitions of all forms of discrimination, including racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, which the university are currently refusing to do. These are just some of the policies that I would like to implement as your next president. And you can find out all the rest of mine on my manifesto. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll vote Luke Mepham for president. Thank you.
The role of president requires you to have a knowledge of the areas that are covered by all of the other SABs. So of the other SAB roles, excluding postgrad, because that's too easy, which one do you know the least about, and what would you do to make sure you knew how to manage and help the person in that role?
Okay, so in my role this year, obviously societies is what I know the most about, and I work very, very closely with sports, having been a president of a sports club myself. So I understand a lot about those two roles, and also have a very, very broad understanding of how the SU as a whole works. So I'd say that leaves the role of welfare. So having done mental health first aid training myself, I do know how to help others, but it's an area that I would love to know how to help communities more, how to help people who are struggling, and just learn a little bit more about our university's wellbeing support services. So welfare is your answer.
For me, I think it would be education, simply because as a social science student, I simply don't understand as much the needs of students, say, who take STEM subjects or art subjects. So I think it's important, therefore, that when looking at education, you reach out to students from across the university, especially STEM students who are typically less represented within student politics, just so that whilst some policies may be really beneficial to art students and social science students, they may have no bearing at all on people doing STEM or medicine. So I think just, overall education and making sure you take a very cross-faculty approach and not just focus on my own faculty.
Hi. So someone mentioned the university adopting definitions of like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. This year, the SU hasn't been very helpful in tackling Islamophobia or calling it out. So how do you expect to do that as the SU rather than just talking to the university about tackling it?
I think it's crucial that in everything the SU and the uni does, that students are sat at the table, because it's all well and good having a few officers and a few members of staff sitting together in a focus group trying to come up with solutions, but I think it requires loads of students coming together with the decision makers, telling them exactly what needs to be done, because I don't think simply a few virtue signalling points is going to get anyone anywhere. It needs to be very straightforward, students sitting down, telling officers and staff what needs to be done, and change should come away through that means.
So I think, as lots of the kind of candidates have said before, especially in welfare, a lot of this kind of does come from reaching out to the communities that are affected. And I hope that in my work through creating liberation associations next term, I'll be able to reach out to those communities and kind of find out a little bit about how they are affected, so that I can then take that to the university and lobby them. And part of that will come through the ongoing external speaker policy reform, which I'm the lead SAB on. And so next term, we'll be talking to the university about about how they use the PREVENT policy, and kind of really tackling that. And in the process of that, I will be speaking to Islamic students and Muslim students and finding out a little bit about kind of how they are affected by PREVENT and tackling it in that way.
I completely agree that our wellbeing services are underfunded and that disability support here is shocking. However, given that one of the reasons why disability support is shocking is because this government has slashed and burnt disability funding, which means disabled student funding has been decimated, how will you lobby beyond the university to improve that? Because I think for once, this isn't solely the university's fault.
Okay, so obviously the remit does kind of remain within the university primarily. However, there is definitely scope there to encourage Warwick to be nationally leading, and in that way they'll be able to promote it and encourage other universities and also the government to follow suit. So in doing that and reaching out to other SUs, we can really put pressure on the university and then further the government to increase this funding. So yeah, that's my answer.
Well, I'm actually very good mates with my MP, who's a Home Office minister, so I might get in contact with him and have a word. But more seriously, I just think in reality, we hopefully coming out of austerity now, there should be hopefully more funding in education. I'm really optimistic that the government are going to start investing more in our services. But I do generally think that the university should be at the forefront of using their own funds to do this. As a lot of candidates have been discussing tonight, the uni do have a massive budget surplus, and the university should be looking at the real possibility of using that funding at first before trying to secure external funding.
Hi. So in a lot of the stuff that you guys were saying, not in this point, but in the point before, about like reaching out to liberation societies, and learning from them and having them in that room. My question is, how are you going to do that in a way that isn't violent towards them? Because having been in those rooms where having to explain first why this is racism to me, and then finally getting onto conversations about how to fix that. And that is traumatic to people of color on this campus. It's traumatic to the liberation communities that you guys keep on touting. It's just traumatic overall, and it's just not good enough for you to go into that room completely unprepared and then expect them to educate you, because that's free labor from us, and it's just not fair. So that's my question.
Yeah, well, I think all staff have a responsibility, regardless of whether they're being told to or not, to try and create the most inclusive environment as possible. And I think that should be promoted to all students and staff, regardless of yeah, literally, from the second they arrive at Warwick, it should be promoted. And ultimately, I think that students should be at the forefront of that change, but everyone's got the right, should be doing it anyway. Yeah, no, I think, is that okay? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure.
You're just kind of touting diversity, and diversity
Yeah.
without decolonization is just violence. So that doesn't help me.
Well, ultimately, my question, I want to hear from students from across the university how to do things best. How would you, personally, how do you think that the SU should do it best?
Do your job, because that is your job, and I'm not running for this election, but you just need to educate yourself.
Okay,
because
no, I'm more than willing to do that, yeah. I'm sorry I
Sorry,
can't...
can I just request that this doesn't like become a discussion? This is
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
like
okay.
answering
No,
questions.
I'm really sorry I can't give you a satisfactory answer. Personally, I've been involved with liberation activities for the disabled intersex community, and I found that sitting around the table is the best option for me in trying to provide solutions. I want to hear from students from other backgrounds who I haven't had as much contact with to see how they can do it best. And I'll be really grateful if I am elected if students from across the university could tell me what I can do best to help them. That's...
Okay, so I think initially, as lots of the candidates before were saying, I don't experience oppression within my life, and so it's up to me to educate myself going into those conversations. So going into those conversations, I should educate myself and not expect those from the marginalised communities to explain it to me and explain their lived experiences to me fully. Obviously, it will require some of that discussion in terms of finding a way forward and finding a way to change policies and make policies more accepting and kind of inclusive. However, it's all about educating yourself beforehand.
Hi, thank you. So Charlotte, you mentioned that within there's a budget surplus that the university has to provide for disabled students.
Just to say you can't like target a question.
Yeah,
at
this is
specific
going to be
candidates.
general.
Okay.
I'm just going off the back of that. And one of the reasons why is because the university has certain investments in certain types of companies, right? So Palestine Solidarity Campaign made a freedom of information request for the university to disclose its financial investments, but the university refused, possibly because there's some shady shit going down there. Since you represent students in liaison with the university and its management, how will you bring Warwick University, with its undisclosed investments, under democratic control? How will you make sure that we know what these investments are, and if they are indeed socially irresponsible, how far would you go to make the university accountable to its students, including its Palestinian students?
I'd say when you're studying at a university, you're paying tuition fees there. It's only fair that you should know where that money's going and where that money's being invested. So if elected, I would like to lobby the university to reveal what those investments are. And if they are investing in some kind of dodgy, I'm not going to use the words you used, in some dodgy stuff, then kind of put pressure on them to remove those investments and hold them to account where necessary. Shame them where necessary, but also maintaining those relationships, but where necessary, telling them that enough's enough, you need to stop.
To be honest, though I 100% agree that some investments really aren't beneficial, and that the university should have a deep and meaningful review of some of its relationships with external companies. At its core, the university should still strive to build meaningful relationships with companies all around the world as a global campus, that it should look around the world for companies that it can provide career opportunities to students, can help with research, can help raise money for the university, but those companies should have the best interests of the world, the university's values and the Students' Union values at heart.
So my question is regarding the BP archive that is present on campus. There is, in that archive, supposedly research regarding climate change that is not being disclosed to the public because it's private and corporate. Although it seems that all this research should be publicly available to everyone. So will you, as president of the Student Union, commit to either pressuring BP and the university to disclose this private research, or if they refuse to comply removing them off campus so that we may not participate in that action.
Personally, I think that all research should be as open and free and accessible to everyone. I think that should be a core element of academia, especially at a top university like Warwick. And I think that, however, dangerous research that potentially is harmful should also be restricted. I think ultimately that's for I would, if I was president, investigate that possibility and work with all students regarding that to make sure that the right outcome can be reached.
So reiterating that, exact same as Charlotte, all research should be available. It's being funded by essentially our tuition fees a lot of the time. So that research should be available to everyone, especially if it was kind of conducted here at Warwick. And so I think it would be a case of having to speak to students, kind of maybe getting an all-student vote and seeing whether students do want it to be removed from campus, and if that's necessary, then removing it from campus and lobbying the university to do so.
What plans do you have to tackle the climate emergency?
Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, one of my main 5 manifesto points is to embed sustainability within the curriculum. So I think a lot of students want to help with climate change and want to help tackle this emergency, but really struggle with kind of knowing what is sustainable, from things like fast fashion all the way to just using too much water in their accommodations. So embedding kind of basic sustainability and environmental knowledge within the curriculum, we can encourage all to really do their bit and then tackle kind of the much bigger issues, such as the university, and getting them to actually really stick to their targets and beat them, ideally.
I'm just going to kind of talk about a few small but meaningful changes that I think the university could work towards in the short term. Things such as solar panels, just generally cutting water usage in SU outlets and accommodation, planting more trees and promoting green spaces. I think long term as well, the university should look into, I think the local area will benefit from a train service between Leamington and the university to help reduce the use of buses. And I know of a few other candidates that have potentially looked at that idea, and it was also discussed in the recent general election. I also think as well that the university should, as a big part of the city of Coventry, work with the city in order to generally promote environmental sustainability in a big city such as that, particularly in the areas of public transport. And so, but I generally think within my year as Warwick SU president, I want to see, as I said, solar panels, cut water usage, more green spaces on campus and more trees planted.
I'm sure we can agree in general that not every meaningful relationship is a good relationship. With that said, as president of the student union, would you stand and say that there are any corporations, please name them if you can, which you think the university should not work with?
I'm not going to name any particular corporations, as I think that's a matter to be decided further down the line. I do, however, think that companies that inherently are against the interests of all the students here at Warwick are the ones that should be targeted, particularly as we look towards dealing with the climate emergency, ones associated with fossil fuels and carbon emissions, and also arms companies as well, responsible for producing weapons. The university should also consider looking again, ceasing work with them, as I think it's not conducted with the values here at Warwick and of the student body. I do, however, think that the university should still continue, it shouldn't alienate all companies. Some excellent research can be done with a range of companies, particularly towards Land Rover Jaguar in the Lord Bhattacharya building. Though you may think cars and fossil, and the first thing that comes to mind is why are we encouraging research of the automobile industry with fossil fuels, but some of the research there is truly groundbreaking. So we need to be careful not to break down meaningful relationships, at the same time tackling the ones that generally are harmful.
Okay, so obviously there are a lot of kind of companies present on campus, including, as Charlotte mentioned, Jaguar Land Rover. And a lot of students do have very different views on that. You've got a lot of students who work with WMG and work with these companies as part of their courses, and they do bring in a lot of research and as such a lot of income for the university. However, we have got to think about the impact on students and kind of how ethical these investments are. So, for example, the massive Lord Bhattacharya building being put up in the middle of campus, that is kind of prime real estate that could be used for other students. And is it the most student-friendly way of kind of building a building, especially when we're looking at the climate emergency? Probably not. So I definitely tackle the university on that and make sure that in the future any investments are in the best benefit of students.
Hi there, thank you. So a bit more of a fun one potentially. If you had money no object and you could make any physical change to the university campus, what do you believe would be the #1 priority and why?
Any physical change? Okay. So my initial thought was going to be to have free sports memberships, free sports access, but I guess that's not physical. So I'd like to see more study space, essentially. So putting in buildings with loads of study space, but also making sure that they're exactly completely carbon neutral, with lots of green space around, but basically study space for everyone, because it is a massive issue.
3 simple words: spoons on campus.
Hi, so Luke, at one point you mentioned that you would lobby the university against Prevent's presence on campus, and Charlotte, in contradiction to that, you mentioned how you have a friend at the Home Office. So I'm just asking, what are you planning to do about the Home Office's influence on campus in terms of Prevent, how campus security targets students on campus, which you would know about if you were following Work Occupy, about how international students' presence is monitored. Even when I'm feeling ill, I have to show up, or else my visa is in danger. So I'm just wondering, what are you going to do about the Home Office's influence on campus and Prevent policies? Thank you.
I think it's really key that we make sure that campus is a place that everyone can feel safe on. I think it really is disgusting how people on visas are subjected to these discriminatory policies. One of my lecturers, for example, was desperate to go on strike, but was refused the opportunity to do so due to her visa restrictions. And so I would tirelessly lobby the university and the government, including my friend in the Home Office, to see these changes.
So I think the first thing to look at with tackling this is kind of exactly, first of all, what the laws are, and then how the university abide by these laws, because it could be, and it is in some cases, that the university are stricter than the actual laws are. So it's making sure that they are kind of being as flexible as they possibly can, so not abusing the Prevent agenda, for example, and working with campus security to make sure that they don't do that. And also just lobbying the university to lobby higher than them, kind of to the university's minister, and encouraging them to make it more flexible, make it so that students aren't feeling like they're constantly being monitored.
Hello. So as the president, you will be representing all students, not just undergrads. So there's quite a diverse way of pathways and student types that we have on this campus. So we have degree apprenticeship, 2+2 students, and postgrads, obviously. So how will you ensure that you're adequately able to support all the different types of student pathways we have on campus?
So I think one of the things to make sure is that it's kind of embedded within the SU, this support of all students as opposed to just undergraduates. So currently the SU is set up essentially for 18 to 21 undergraduates. So everything from our nightlife, like pop on a Wednesday night, to our outlets and events. So it's making sure that the SU is available a lot more hours for those students that maybe aren't on campus at the same time. Make sure that we're running a lot more events for postgrads, for degree apprenticeships, but also continuing the work that I've done this year in making societies and sports clubs a lot more understanding and inclusive of all of these alternative pathways. So encouraging them to run events in the evenings when postgrads are free, encouraging them to think about events that might appeal to degree apprenticeships and making it easier just to turn up for 1 week a term. So it's just making about those communities more accessible, and then those students then more likely to get involved with the rest of the SU.
I think it's really key that the university investigate ways that they can make it easier for, say, part-time students to get involved with societies and sports clubs. So they may not. It's unfair if somebody's only here a few days of the week, or couple of months of the year to have to pay the full sports club passes and the full societies federation fee. So I think that should be massively reduced or scrapped altogether for those students. I also think that the SU should do more to try and engage those students in democracy and really make it clear that they do have the chance to have a say in how things are run, that they are valuable members of the Warwick community, just like your average full-time undergraduate student. And I think that definitely the role of the part-time and mature students officer, for example, should be expanded, and the role of the international students officers, and the role of the postgraduate officer. Speaking to I've got a friend who's mature students.
Sorry, can I just ask you to wrap up?
Yeah, who's a part-time mature student who literally has no idea what goes on in the SU, and I think the university still has a lot to do to engage them.
Thank you. I feel like both candidates have been using the word lobby, and it's beginning to sound like a buzzword to use when you don't actually understand the question or you're trying to dodge answering the question. So can you please define your steps when you say you're going to lobby the university? What are you actually going to do? For the layman here who don't actually understand the word lobbying, because it's beginning to sound like you're trying to avoid the question. Thank you.
Well, to put it quite simply, we need to sit around the table with Stuart Croft and just tell him what needs to be done and be really strong and confrontational about that. It's all well and good holding up a few signs, shouting from afar what needs to be done, but actually getting into the core of this university, sitting down with the people that actually have the power and just telling them point blank what needs to be done, that's what I want to do the most. As much as protest can be a vehicle for change, the SU needs to be really strong that in terms of lobbying, of actually getting into Stuart Croft's office and telling him what needs to be done.
So the relationship between the university and the SU includes quite a lot of reliance from the university on the SU in terms of delivering sports clubs and societies and things like that. And so they do generally respect the SU. And so in terms of lobbying, I think sitting down with them and really explaining what the students want, saying you have a mandate for it, and pushing them and being relentless and kind of not stopping in all committees, mentioning it, and calling more committees where necessary. I'm really just speaking to the people that matter, and reminding them that the SU is the voice of the students and kind of all of the great things that the SU does for the university, and saying, look, we do this, now you've got to give something back.